The year was 1888. And the mood inside the boardroom of the Plymouth Iron Windmill Company was as cold as the Michigan winter rattling the window panes. The factory stood in the small industrial town of Plymouth, just west of Detroit, a monument to a dream that was slowly dying. The air inside the room smelled of stale cigar smoke, cold dust, and anxiety. The men seated around the heavy oak table were not dreamers or toy makers. They were grim-faced industrialists who had staked their fortunes on the American farmer. They built massive structures of iron and steel designed to pull water from deep beneath the earth. Towering machines meant to endure for generations. The ledger lying open on the table told a brutal story written in red ink. Their windmills were engineering marvels, nearly indestructible and built to last a century, but they were also impossibly heavy. Made of cast iron, they were nightmares to transport across the plains. Shipping costs devoured every ounce of profit, pushing the company toward collapse. 25 stockholders faced the terrifying possibility of losing everything. Warehouses were filled with unsellable iron, and hope was running out. Into this atmosphere of quiet despair walked Clarence Hamilton, a watchmaker by trade and an inventor by nature. He carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, placed it on the table, and slowly unwrapped it to reveal a skeletal contraption of metal tubing and a crude wooden stock. It was an air rifle, unlike anything the men had ever seen. Air guns at the time were delicate toys for the wealthy or curious parlor novelties, but this machine was different. It was entirely metal, simple, rugged, and cheap to manufacture. Hamilton picked it up and walked to the corner of the boardroom, where a wire wastebasket sat filled with crumpled paper. He cocked the lever and aimed. The room fell silent. He pulled the trigger. A lead ball burst from the barrel, tearing into the basket with shocking force, puncturing paper and rattling against the wire mesh. The sound was sharp, final, and powerful. Louis Cass Huff, the company's general manager, rose from his chair and walked over to the device. He understood machinery, and he felt the weight of it, the perfect balance, the tension of the spring as he cocked it himself. He fired again, felt the power in his hand, and shouted words that would echo through American history. "Boy, that's a daisy." In the slang of the time, a daisy meant something extraordinary, the best of its kind. In that moment, he was not just praising an invention. He was unknowingly naming an empire. The board of directors did not change course immediately. They were windmill men, unfamiliar with the toy business, and they viewed the gun as a novelty. Desperation drove them to use it as a sales incentive. Farmers who bought a windmill would receive a Daisy air rifle for free. It was meant to sweeten the deal, a bonus for sons or a tool to scare pests. The salesmen spread across rural counties, but the reports they returned with were unexpected. Farmers cared less about windmills and more about the gun. Many wanted the rifle, even if they walked away from the windmill. Some asked to buy the gun alone. The incentive had become more valuable than the product itself. A few pounds of steel tubing and a spring overshadowed towering iron machines that defined an industry. By 1895, the truth was undeniable. The company had stumbled upon a deep desire in the American psyche, the thrill of marksmanship, and the feeling of power at a distance. The board made a fateful decision. Windmill production stopped. The factory was retooled. Blast furnaces that once melted iron for agriculture began melting lead for ammunition. In January 1895, the company dropped the word Windmill forever and became the Daisy Manufacturing Company. This transformation was not an evolution. It was a mutation. A heavy industrial firm became a purveyor of childhood fantasy overnight. Yet Daisy did not build toys like toys. They built them like tools. Early rifles were stamped from heavy steel, fitted with real wood stocks. Assembled by machinists accustomed to building equipment meant to survive tornadoes. Holding a Daisy rifle in 1895 meant holding industrial equipment shrunk for a boy's hands, smelling of machine oil, with sharp edges and a heavy trigger pull. This origin shaped the company for decades. Daisy did not aim to make things soft or safe. It was born in a foundry and believed mastery of metal was a duty. The company handed powerful machines to children, and children embraced them eagerly. Windmills rusted into obscurity, but Daisy bloomed. Its roots digging deep into a nation, entering a century of conflict. The quiet desperation of the boardroom had been shattered by the snap of a spring, and the echo carried across backyards from Maine to California. By the 1930s, the transformation was complete. Windmills were forgotten. The factory on Union Street had become a cathedral of ballistics. The floor trembled with drop forges, the air filled with welding smoke, and the metallic tang of ozone. It was an arsenal disguised as a toy factory. The man leading this empire was Cass Hauff, grandson of Louis Hauff. The grandfather had been a Victorian industrialist, but the grandson was an aviator and risk-taker. He saw boys not as fragile children, but as future soldiers and leaders. Believing strength had to be forged, not coddled. He believed that a boy without a gun was a boy without direction. And that manhood was something built through discipline and steel. A rifle was not seen as a weapon of destruction. It was treated as a tool of discipline. It taught focus. It taught patience. It taught consequences. Missing the target meant failure. Handling the gun carelessly meant pain. That pain was understood as tuition for the school of reality. The company had a philosophy and a factory, but it lacked a myth. In 1938, that myth appeared in the pages of popular comic strips. A character named Red Ryder was capturing the imagination of the nation, drawn by Fred Harmon, a man raised on a Colorado ranch who understood the West through lived experience rather than cinema. Red Ryder was a stoic, battle-hardened cowboy who carried justice in his hands. He was gritty, competent, and unromantic. The opposite of Hollywood's singing cowboys, Daisy decided to create a rifle that embodied this legend in steel and wood. They wanted more than branding. They wanted the gun itself to feel like it had been drawn from a dusty canyon scabbard. The result was the Daisy Red Ryder Model 1938, a defining artifact in American childhood culture. A boy opening a Red Ryder box in 1940 held a nearly 3-pound rifle made from heavy blued steel with a solid hardwood stock stained in deep walnut. Burned into the wood was the image of the cowboy on horseback, a permanent mark of authenticity. The defining feature was the cast metal lever beneath the trigger guard. To cock the gun, a boy had to brace the stock against his hip and crank the lever forward, producing a distinctive mechanical clack that signaled the rifle was live. It was a physical ritual that blurred the line between imagination and reality. Daisy engineers added a saddle ring with a leather thong, a detail that served no ballistic purpose but whispered frontier romance. It allowed the rifle to hang from a nail in a barn or be tied to a bicycle handlebar. reinforcing the illusion of a tool meant for open ranges and wide horizons. The ammunition was just as serious. The Red Ryder fired copper-coated steel BBs that arrived in paper tubes or cardboard cartons. They were heavy, cold, and metallic. Pouring them into the loading port sounded like rain on a tin roof. These were not foam darts but metal spheres, traveling at 300 feet per second, carrying weight and consequence. The Red Ryder arrived as the world darkened. Europe descended into war, and the United States prepared to follow. The Daisy factory became a reflection of the adult world. Fathers carried rifles across battlefields, and sons patrolled backyards with Red Ryders. The fantasy of the Daisy boy became part of national identity. Shooting at a tin can was not just play. It was practice. Daisy embraced this idea fully. Their marketing focused on marksmanship, discipline, and training. Manuals explained how to build home ranges. Partnerships with the Boy Scouts offered merit badges. Safety manuals taught respect for the firing line rather than avoidance of the weapon. The Red Ryder became a symbol of boyhood status. Owning one meant power in the neighborhood hierarchy. The Plymouth factory produced millions, its presses pounding day and night. The town existed to feed the appetite for rifles. Workers fitted wood to steel, tested springs, and packaged dreams with pride. Building heirlooms meant to survive creaks, falls, and decades of use. Every mid-century American boy carried sensory memories of the Red Ryder. The smell of gun oil, the stiffness of the lever, the slight recoil against the shoulder, the flash of a copper BB, streaking through the air before striking with a clean metallic ping. This was the golden age of Plymouth, a time when children's tools mirrored adult tools, just scaled down. Danger existed, but it was managed and understood. Cass Hauff listened to the hum of machinery from his office and believed he had built something eternal. He believed steel, wood, and discipline would always shape boys into men. He did not see plastic toys approaching or legal scrutiny gathering. He believed he was building character, but he was also building a liability that a changing world would reject. By the late 1950s, the town felt a cold wind that had nothing to do with winter. The factory on Union Street had been the heartbeat of Plymouth for 70 years, but confidence gave way to anxiety. The threat was not competition or demand but cultural change. The era of free, roaming children was ending, replaced by a growing consumer safety movement. Newspapers published injury statistics, and safety advocacy became a political force. At the same time, manufacturing realities grew harsh. Strong unions demanded higher wages, aging machinery required costly upgrades, and accountants saw liability instead of legacy. Decisions were made behind closed doors that would seal Plymouth's fate. Cass Hauff, torn between heritage and survival, studied maps and numbers, and chose a town in the Ozark Mountains, where labor was cheaper and land abundant. In 1958, the announcement landed like a bomb. Daisy was leaving Plymouth. The departure felt like betrayal, as if a family had abandoned its grandfather. Workers who had spent lifetimes mastering spring steel and carving stocks felt the ground shift beneath them. The industrial heart of Plymouth began to slow, and the sound of stamping presses that had defined generations started to fade. They carried knowledge that could not be written in any manual. They knew how to treat wood so the grain resisted cracking, how to temper steel so it would not snap in the cold. This was tribal knowledge passed through hands, not textbooks. When the trucks arrived to strip the factory, it felt like a funeral procession. Massive stamping presses were torn from the concrete floors where they had stood since the 19th century. Tooling, dies molds, and machines were crated and shipped away. But the men were left behind. Master machinists, woodworkers, and assemblers received handshakes and severance checks, and were told to rebuild their lives in a town that had just lost its heartbeat. The new operation in Rogers, Arkansas, was efficient, modern, and sterile compared to the brick fortress in Michigan. It was built for volume, speed, and cost reduction. In this environment, lawyers and accountants began to shape the product as much as engineers. As the 1970s arrived, pressure from regulators intensified. The mandate was simple and relentless. Make it safer. Make it weaker. Make it impossible to sue. Engineers who once chased power and precision were now tasked with restraint. Velocity was reduced, springs softened, triggers redesigned until they felt lifeless. The greatest transformation came in the materials. For decades, the soul of the Red Ryder had been its wooden stock. Hardwood carried weight, warmth, and history. Wood aged without shattering. Wood demanded care. When a boy pressed his cheek against walnut, he felt connected to pioneers, cowboys, and soldiers. Management replaced that wood with molded plastic, disguised with fake grain and painted brown. The deception vanished the moment it was touched. The stock was hollow, slick, and split by a seam that betrayed mass production. The relationship between child and object changed forever. Wood was a tool. Plastic was a toy. Wood demanded responsibility. Plastic invited neglect and disposal. The decline spread across the entire rifle. Steel was thinned. The lever became flimsy stamped metal. The saddle ring became decorative. By the mid-1970s, the Red Ryder looked familiar but felt empty. The danger had been engineered out, and respect disappeared with it. What once demanded discipline became an object of mild annoyance. Parents bought them out of nostalgia, believing they were passing on tradition. But they were handing their children a hollow imitation. The lawyers succeeded in reducing risk and cutting costs. But they severed the artery of the brand. A rite of passage became a stock-keeping unit. The scent of gun oil and sawdust vanished, replaced by heated plastic and cardboard. The decline was not sudden. It was a slow slide into mediocrity, masked by quarterly profits and marketing promises. The Plymouth factory rotted in silence. The brick complex on Union Street stood as a tombstone to industrial abandonment. Windows shattered, roofs sagged, and floors flooded where craftsmen once stood. To the town, it became a haunted place, filled with the ghosts of lost work and lost identity. The echoes of dropped forges and the scent of ozone lingered only in memory. When demolition crews arrived, they buried more than a building. They buried a century of industrial pride. The true death of the Daisy Empire unfolded not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in living rooms. As the 1980s turned into the 1990s, childhood was colonized by screens. Gray plastic consoles replaced backyards. Digital weapons replaced tin cans. The duck hunt zapper became the bridge, a plastic light gun with no recoil, no projectile, and no consequence. The pixel era transformed the Daisy Boy into a gamer. Physical marksmanship was replaced by virtual reflexes. Real physics gave way to algorithms. The discipline of breathing, aiming, and waiting was replaced by respawn loops and digital spectacle. Daisy tried to adapt, producing tactical plastic rifles inspired by video games. But the battle was already lost. The BB gun faded from rite of passage to nostalgic relic. In modern stores, the Red Ryder hangs in blister packs as another commodity owned by a corporate portfolio. The cowboy image remains, but the meaning is gone. The modern rifle is light, hollow, and engineered to the edge of disposability. It is meant to be bought, briefly used, and forgotten. The original company set out to build machines and accidentally built teachers. The early Red Ryder taught consequence, power, and restraint. As weight and reality were stripped away, that teacher disappeared. A world of safe plastic and digital resets replaced steel, resistance, and consequence. The ghosts of Plymouth remain restless because their philosophy was abandoned. Steel was replaced with simulation. Responsibility was replaced with entertainment. The wind still moves across the empty lot where the furnaces once roared, but the sound of copper striking tin is gone. The noise of American childhood has faded, replaced by the silent glow of screens where nothing truly carries weight and no one learns to aim. If you like this video, don't forget to share and subscribe.